All right, hello there. My name's David Chad, and this is Abnormal Psychology in the most strange possible way. I know many of you did not sign up to take this class online. I also didn't sign up to teach it online. Just full disclosure, this is the first course I have taught online, and I'm not terribly comfortable with it, but we'll figure it out as we go along. That's probably to your benefit that I am not terribly comfortable with it. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about the course. This is, as I said, this is my first online course. I have taught abnormal psychology for, God, I don't know, a long time. Taught at EKU for 7 or 8 years. Before that, I taught community college. Altogether, probably 15 years I've been teaching psychology. This is going to be a little different. So just tonight I wanted to go through and talk to you a little bit about how the course is going to be set up, the things we're going to be doing, what this is going to look like. First of all, we're live from my palatial estate of 800 square feet or so in Georgetown, Kentucky. That's where I live. I'm an EKU grad, graduated from University of Kentucky in psychology, and then went to EKU for clinical psychology master's program. So if any of you really like psychology, I would strongly encourage that. This is the only class I teach. My day job, I'm the director of programs at the Hope Center in Lexington, which is a homeless shelter / drug and alcohol rehab, just sort of a catch-all for particularly homeless populations. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about this course. It's about abnormal psychology. It's particularly about the disorders that we frequently talk about when we talk about psychology in general. Things like depression, schizophrenia, substance use. So that's pretty much what we'll be spending the bulk of the course talking about. We'll be talking a little bit about like the history. We'll be talking a little bit about research methods. We'll be talking some about treatments, but primarily what we're going to be looking at is different disorders, and also just how we cope with those. So most of the course is going to be set up on Blackboard. I have posted the syllabus. It is available, so take a look at that. It has due dates and all that stuff, which will be entirely, they may be subject to change. Also, I have sort of an outline of how we're going to run this course. My plan is, as I mentioned, I did plan to teach this in person. I've always taught it in person, and so now I'm kind of shifting things around. My plan here is to do some videos like this, one a week, that are sort of brief in nature and just cover the main focal points of each of the sections. For example, if we're talking about the chapter on psychotic disorders, I'll talk a little bit about schizophrenia and some of the things to look out for. We'll be utilizing Blackboard a lot. I'll post things there under the course documents section. Post links to YouTube videos. I'll post some like PowerPoint slides that I would have used had we been in person. I think those are helpful when you're reading through the text. It is, let me pull that up and I'll tell you what the text is. Same one I've used for several semesters. Oh, forget that. It's Durand and Barlow, Essentials of Abnormal Psychology. So just for more information, just check out the syllabus. I can't open it, so maybe you can't either. So I'll look at that when I get done with this video and make sure that it is linked correctly. In any case, so I'll post some PowerPoint things that you might be able to use as reference when you're reading or when I'm talking. I may talk from those as well. I'll post some YouTube videos or articles or things that I think are relevant. A big focal point over the years with teaching this class is bringing in sort of relevant current events, because there's a lot in our world now that would fall under the category of abnormal. There's a lot of strange things going on out there, particularly today, and I think we can look at some of the recent history and events that are going on. Just the way this class is structured is abnormal. So we'll look at current events and how they relate. We may spend some time talking about all this COVID stuff and how it impacts things there. For those of you who may not know, I told you I work in the recovery field, and things like overdoses and suicides have increased pretty dramatically during this stretch due to the isolation and just increase of stress that's come along with COVID. So we'll talk about maybe how our world currently is shaped by those things and how this study of abnormal psychology is shaped by some of those current events. We talk about this. I have notes over here, so I'm not just staring aimlessly off into space. But when we talk about this, I think the important thing is to talk about what the difference between normal and abnormal and how do we know. And sometimes there is a very fine line. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. A person who is obviously seeing things and hearing things and talking to themselves, they may have schizophrenia, and we are able to pretty accurately determine that that is not normal. Whereas a person who is struggling with depression, they may look normal. They may feel normal. All of us have struggled with depression. All of us have struggled with anxiety. At what point does that become a disorder? And is it something we need to concern ourselves with versus something that just happens to all of us? So like sadness, perfectly normal. A depression that's going on for several weeks at a time and includes suicidal thoughts and you can't get out of bed and you can't go to class, that's abnormal. That's different than what we expect from the world. Something like substance use. It's not abnormal for most people to have a drink, 2 drinks, maybe even 4 or 5 drinks. What is abnormal is to drink all day, every day, to the point that it controls your life, it ruins your life. And that is definitely something that we'll talk about as we go along. How do we get to the point where that is abnormal? How do we identify that? How do we identify when a normal behavior becomes deviant or abnormal? Think of something as simple as tattoos. I have a tattoo right there. It's got my son's name on it. That most people would not consider that abnormal. Probably a lot of you have tattoos. What if you had like 100 and your face is covered with tattoos and you have lots of piercings? Many people may consider that abnormal. Just also depends on where you are. It would be more abnormal if you're working as a stockbroker on Wall Street as opposed to being in a heavy metal band. So like the situation and where you are and even the time can make a difference between what's normal and abnormal. 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it'd be pretty abnormal for me to be talking to you on this wonderful iPad here. It'd be weird. We all have cell phones, so like people can get a hold of us all the time. My grandparents would probably think that was strange and wouldn't like it. Today we can't really live without it. So just our world is different, and what we consider normal and abnormal changes over time. Things like eating. Maybe you can tell because of my 6 chins, but I'm overweight. Eating is something that is a normal behavior. Overeating, obesity is one of the largest problems in our culture today. You can also have abnormal, deviant behavior on the other side. Undereating, things like anorexia or bulimia, can become psychological disorders. So we'll talk about how relatively normal behavior, absolutely normal behavior, like sleeping and eating can turn into abnormal psychological disorders. It happens all the time. And so Also, we talk about what differentiates abnormal from normal. What makes a psychological disorder? What makes something weird versus just being, regular part of our life? Situations, certainly. We can probably think of countless examples of things we would do in one situation that we wouldn't do in another. You would do things around your friends that you wouldn't do around your parents or your grandparents. You would do, or your teachers or professors. So situations can depict can determine how we act. Also, just our environment. I mentioned like the jobs. That environment can dictate a lot. It would be far more acceptable for a person to have multiple piercings and like sleeves of tattoos, depending on their job. I work in a homeless shelter. It's totally cool. I could be tattooed from head to toe. Nobody would notice. But I also probably couldn't. I couldn't do some other jobs, or I'd be judged for doing some other jobs based on that same type of behavior. Think of religion when we talk about this. Some of the situational, environmental stuff, snake handling. If you belong to a church that does that, it's completely normal within your faith. Or talking in tongues, completely normal within that faith, but something the world at large generally thinks of as being unusual or abnormal. So that's sort of what we're talking about here. What differentiates being normal and abnormal? And sometimes that's something like the people that you're around. We judge a lot of what makes a psychological disorder. We'll talk about that later, a couple weeks, maybe next week, by the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is sort of the Bible for diagnosing mental health issues. And so part of that book is revisions every so often. As early back as the DSM-3, things like homosexuality were considered to be deviant behavior. They're considered to be psychological disorders. That has been eliminated over time because it is a behavior that doesn't meet the criteria to be a disorder. It has to interfere with your functioning in order to be a disorder. It has to get in the way of your daily life, and it has to be different than your culture. It has to be different than what's socially acceptable. And that just doesn't fit the bill. But again, it's time. Time is another factor. So, 30, 40 years ago, when the DSM-3 was still being utilized, that was something that was still considered a disorder, even though the tide was turning and that conversation was changing and people were beginning to realize that wasn't the same thing as, schizophrenia or what have you. So how we look at disorders changes over time. Well, we'll talk about some of those changes too as we go through. But you get some of those environmental factors into play, also just individual differences. I mentioned alcohol use. For some people who have a problem with alcohol, they can't drink a single drink. They can't, or it will trigger a pattern of sort of unstable behavior. People who might be bipolar and struggle with gambling or impulsive spending have to be very careful because one action can trigger a whole lot of destructive actions. And so it can be up to an individual. Something that is not a problem for me could be a problem for you, or it could be a problem for somebody else. Also, genetics play a big role. We'll talk about that as we go throughout the semester. How some people are just more predisposed to certain disorders than others. I mentioned bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. They have a very high heritability, so they're genetically passed down from generation to generation. If your parents had schizophrenia, you're more likely to have schizophrenia than just some average Joe in the community. So there are those factors that we have to look at when determining psychological disorders. And also just sort of individual history. Some people who have had issues with anxiety are probably going to be more predisposed to having depression. People with substance use disorders are more likely to have depression or anxiety or other disorders, this comorbidity. as we'll talk about as we go along. So some of those things that we're going to look at and talk about. Just a couple of topics to introduce you as we're going along. There's a topic or a theory. We talk about how our thinking about psychological disorders have been shaped over time. We started out sort of in the spiritual, religious world where abnormal behavior, psychological disorders were seen as being demonic or sort of problems spiritually. Think back to even the Salem witch trials. They thought that any sort of deviant behavior meant you were a witch. We had the medical theories that came along with, like the hysterical uterus causing psychological disturbances in women, and that was a common medical condition that was cited as the reason for things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression. They weren't really commonly known as that then, but that was a medical term that came along. Not until we started getting into more modern medicine did we start to get into sort of more conversation about treatments and biological causes and neurotransmitters. And we'll go next week or video or however we're doing this. We'll go through some of that sort of historical context and how we got to where we are currently when we talk about psychological disorders. But one of the theories that came out of all this was a theory called harmful dysfunction. And what is a psychological disorder? First of all, it has to be sort of value judgment that a disorder is harmful, that it is something that needs to be tended to, needs to be treated. And it kind of has to interfere with your basic everyday normal function. We'll talk about that idea in a minute. But the other thing with harmful dysfunction is there's a failure in the system, some mechanism of how behavior is supposed to work. Essentially, something is broken. And that goes into sort of this idea of natural selection. You know, we have we're supposed to operate in a certain way. We're supposed to behave in a certain way, and we don't, and that causes some sort of harmful dysfunction. Take the idea of depression. Your brain is supposed to operate. You're supposed to operate in a certain way, and if you are so depressed that you can't get out of bed, you can't perform your job, you can't do your daily duties of life, then that creates a harmful dysfunction that makes a psychological disorder. When we talk about the DSM-5, we look at sort of a list of criteria for what makes a disorder, and then a couple of other criteria. It has to interfere with your daily life, socially, economically. So it has to keep you from getting a job. It has to cause relationship problems, trouble in school. So it has to be interfering in your functioning to the point that it's noticeable. It has to be different than the social norm. It has to violate what society thinks is normal. And so the million-dollar question is what the society thinks is normal. That seems to be an ever-changing thing. And we're talking more about sort of our Western culture. Other cultures have different ideas of what makes behavior abnormal. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Probably not a whole lot, not as much as if we were in person, because I don't know how some of this stuff plays over video. There's also just a fine line. You know, it's hard to tell sometimes what is normal and what is abnormal on any given day. As a therapist, when somebody comes into my office, it's sometimes easy to tell if what they're experiencing is dysfunctional or harmful. And sometimes it's hard to tell if it's just not normal, if it's not normal anxiety. For example, like everybody gets anxious before a test or before like a first date or before some big deadline. That's not abnormal at all. And as a matter of fact, without that level of anxiety, we wouldn't be able to perform. We wouldn't be able to do all of the things that we need to do to get by in our daily life. And that's a far cry from someone who can't leave their house because they're afraid something terrible is going to happen if they do, or they're going to die, or they're going to have like a panic attack. So that's a level of anxiety that is different from what we would consider normal. We talked about sadness versus depression. It's completely normal to be sad if you lose a loved one, or if a cat dies, or your girlfriend or boyfriend breaks up with you. If you have some significant loss in your life, completely normal. What's not normal is when it interferes with your ability to function in your life over a long period of time. The DSM says a couple of weeks, so you have to have symptoms for a couple of weeks, most of the day, nearly every day. Then you start thinking about it as being a problem. So, that's one of the things that we have to look at when we talk about that. There is a fine line. Not with all disorders. Like I mentioned, like psychotic disorders, like schizophrenia. If you're seeing things that aren't there and hearing voices that aren't there, and it's not part of your religion, we know that is not normal. That's a behavior that's coming from a neurological condition, or maybe from withdrawing from drugs or alcohol. But either way, it's not something that should be happening. There's a flaw in the system somewhere. There's harmful dysfunction at work there. And, so we'll look at some of those things. We'll look at the signs and the treatments and what to do in those cases. But, alas, this is the first video I've done, so I'm kind of experimenting here. This is 21 minutes and 37 seconds, so I don't want to do this first one much longer than that because I want to make sure it will upload. But so your assignments for the first week, and I'll put this in the announcement. First of all, keep an eye out for the announcements on Blackboard. I will update that with pretty much any time I put something new on, any kind of things I want you to know that are different. So keep an eye out there. Check that at least once a week. This class is supposed to be on Thursday nights, and so you'll notice your syllabus still contains deadlines that are Thursday. If that's a problem for you guys, you can let me know. I would like to have sort of like weekly assignments just to kind of keep us on. You look at the syllabus, I talk about sort of a weekly assignment, and that could be like a brief, like really short quiz over the things we talked about or things that I've given you to read or watch, or it could be a discussion point. Like this week, I'm really just wanting you all to kind of browse around. I put a question, like an introduction question, on the discussion board on Blackboard. Just go down until you see the discussion board and look at that. Introduce yourself. I just am really testing to see how all this stuff works. I've used Blackboard for a long time. I've never used most of these features, so I'm trying to get used to it. So I want you to go through and kind of look at the syllabus, read it over. If you have any questions, you can email me. My cell phone number's on there. You can text me. You can call me. Probably better to text me first and tell me who you are, so I don't think you're somebody trying to sell me car insurance. Otherwise, I might not answer. But if you text me first and let me know you're going to call me, that's fine. I'd be happy to talk to you. But look over the syllabus. Keep an eye out for the announcement sections. The syllabus posted on Blackboard, but like I said, I can't open it, so maybe don't look at it until tomorrow. I'm going to see if maybe that's just some sort of glitch and it's really there and I can't figure it out, but I will re-upload it. Also, keep it out for your email. Blackboard, if you haven't used it a lot, it's pretty much set up that anything I post on here will go to email, so keep an eye out there. I'll try to be as responsive as I can with questions or anything like that. So for the first week, what I want you to do is simple. I want you to watch this video. I want you to read over the syllabus. Let me know if you have any questions. And I will probably post a short video later in the week just to kind of give you a idea of what's to come next, sort of a tease for week number 2. Also, I'm going to put the assignments for each week in a folder. Week 1 assignments will be in week 1 folder, week 2, etc. So to try to make it easier. I don't care if you get ahead. If you want to, if you know, I put some assignments out there that you can get done a couple weeks early. I don't care. Whatever makes you happy. I will try to do a couple of these lecture things ahead, just to give you that opportunity, but I can't promise that. So, welcome back to campus. I know it's a strange time. I thank you for taking this class, and I really appreciate you sticking with it, even though many of you didn't plan for an online class. I know it's stressful times right now, but hang in there. We'll hopefully talk about some things that are fun this semester and interest you, and if there are topics that you really are excited about and want to make sure we cover, let me know. I'm happy to throw things in. This is your class, so we'll make it as fun as we can. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and like I said, I'll probably post a video a little later in the week, just a short, 5 minutes or so, just outline of what we're going to do next time. All right, thank you.